Look, little girl, this isn't a high school JROTC field trip. Put the rifle down before you hurt yourself. The crowd of sailors, mostly young men fresh from boot camp and A school, laughed. It was a nervous, uncertain sound, the kind of laughter that springs from a desire to align with perceived authority rather than genuine amusement. They stood around the long, oil-stained workbench of the Naval Amphibious Base Coronado Armory, a cavernous space that smelled perpetually of CLP and old metal. The man who had spoken, Chief Gunner's mate Thompson, leaned against the counter with the easy arrogance of a man who believed his rank and his booming voice were substitutes for wisdom. He was a caricature of a lifer, with a thick neck that strained the collar of his uniform and a face weathered not by combat, but by years of shouting at subordinates under the California sun. He saw the woman before him not as a fellow sailor, but as an intrusion. She was slight of build, wearing standard Navy working uniform with the sleeves neatly rolled, but no rank was immediately visible on her collar. Her dark hair was pulled back into a severe, functional bun, and her face, devoid of makeup, was a study in placid neutrality. She had been quietly, methodically disassembling a Mark 12 special-purpose rifle, her hands moving with an economy of motion that was almost hypnotic. She hadn't been showing off. She'd been performing a function check, her focus absolute. But her silence, her sheer presence in his domain, had been an affront to Chief Thompson's fragile sense of order. The sailor's laughter died as she didn't react. She didn't flinch, didn't look up, didn't offer a single word of protest. Her entire world seemed to have shrunk to the rifle components laid out on the cleaning mat. It was this utter lack of reaction, this silent dismissal of his authority, that truly stoked his ire. He wanted a response, a flash of fear or anger, an argument he could easily win. Her calm was a mirror, and he didn't like the reflection. But when the base commander, a man who had seen more of the world than Thompson could ever imagine, happened to glance through the armory's open bay door, he didn't see a lost clerk. He saw the way she held her shoulders, the perfect, relaxed posture of someone who had spent thousands of hours behind a weapon. He saw the precise, deliberate placement of each pin and spring, a familiarity that spoke not of training manuals, but of muscle memory forged in the harshest environments on Earth. The commander paused, a knot of premonition tightening in his stomach, a sudden and inexplicable sense of having stumbled upon something far above his pay grade. He knew that look. It was the look of a true professional, a quiet lethality that had no need for volume. If you believe that true strength doesn't need to announce itself, type respect is earned in the comments below. The chief, oblivious to the commander's silent observation, pushed himself off the counter and swaggered closer, his shadow falling over her workbench. "Did you hear me?" I said, "Step away from the weapon. This is a restricted area for qualified personnel only. Where are you from, supply? Did you get turned around looking for the mess hall? Go on, shoo. The big boys are busy." His words were a cascade of condescension, each one designed to diminish her, to put her back in the box his prejudice had built for her. He gestured vaguely with a thumb toward the door, his face a mask of patronizing impatience. Still, she said nothing. Her focus remained unbroken. She picked up the bolt carrier group, her fingers tracing the lines of the machine steel as if reading a sacred text. The silence in the room grew heavy, thick with the unspoken tension. The young sailors were no longer smiling. They were watching a confrontation unfold, a clash not of arms, but of philosophies. On one side was the loud, blustering arrogance of assumed power. On the other, the profound, unshakable gravity of demonstrated competence. Her stillness was an act of defiance more powerful than any shouted retort. It communicated with absolute clarity that his words, his presence, his entire world of petty tyranny were utterly irrelevant to her. He was a buzzing fly, and she was a block of granite. This infuriating calm drove Thompson to escalate. He reached out, his thick fingers intending to snatch the bolt carrier from her hand. It was a line being crossed, a violation of professional courtesy and personal space. But his hand never made it. Without looking up, She shifted her weight almost imperceptibly, and the component was no longer there. It was in her other hand, which was now wiping down the upper receiver with a clean rag. The movement was so fluid, so economical, it was almost missed. It wasn't a defensive block. It was simply an act of continuing her task that incidentally made his own action moot. He was left reaching for empty air, a fool grasping at smoke. The embarrassment flushed his face a deep, mottled red. He was losing control, and he knew it. The very foundation of his authority, built on intimidation and volume, was cracking under the weight of her silent professionalism. The world of the armory, usually a place of rigid hierarchy and loud commands, had become a theater of quiet humiliation, and he was the unwilling star. The air crackled with anticipation, every person in the room holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen when an immovable object met a truly pathetic force. The base commander, still watching from the doorway, felt a cold certainty dawn on him. He didn't know who this woman was, but he knew with every fiber of his being that Chief Thompson was making the biggest mistake of his career, a mistake that was about to be corrected in a way no one could possibly foresee. A sudden, jarring clatter broke the tense standoff. A young seaman, nervous under the weight of the charged atmosphere, had dropped a loaded magazine for a Beretta M9. It hit the concrete floor with a sound like a gunshot, and 9mm rounds scattered across the grimy floor like metallic seeds. The seaman froze, his face pale with panic. Chief Thompson, grateful for the distraction and a target for his frustration, spun around. Butterfingers, are you incompetent? Pick those up. Now, on your hands and knees. His voice was a whip crack, and the young sailor practically dove to the floor, scrambling to gather the loose cartridges. Thompson stood over him, a triumphant sneer returning to his face as he reasserted his dominance over the lowest man on the totem pole. It was in that moment of distraction that the true demonstration began, not with a bang, but with a quiet click. Anya Sharma, having finished her function check, began to reassemble the Mark 12 SPR. For anyone who understood the weapon system, what they witnessed next was something akin to watching a grandmaster play a dozen games of chess simultaneously in their head. Her hands didn't just move, they flowed. There was no hesitation, no fumbling, no wasted motion. The bolt slid into the carrier with a whisper of oiled steel. The cam pin, a notoriously finicky component, was seated with a single, practiced twist of her wrist. The charging handle and bolt carrier group were inserted into the upper receiver, the pieces marrying with a solid, satisfying chunk. It was a symphony of mechanical precision, a flawless execution of a complex task performed at a speed that bordered on supernatural. The sailors, their attention drawn from their shamed colleague, watched, mesmerized. They had all been trained to assemble this weapon. It took them minutes, often accompanied by grunts of frustration and the occasional dropped pin. She did it in seconds, her expression as serene as a meditating monk. The climax of this silent performance came with the optics. The rifle was equipped with a Leupold Mark IV scope, a high-end piece of equipment with notoriously complex turret adjustments for windage and elevation. The scope had been flagged for being off-zero, a problem that had stumped the armory staff for 2 days. Thompson had declared it needed to be sent back to the manufacturer, a process that would take weeks. Anya picked up the scope, her eyes scanning the turrets. She didn't use any tools. She simply held it up, sighting a distant point on the far wall. Her thumb and forefinger made a series of minute, almost imperceptible adjustments to the knobs. Click, 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 click. The sounds were tiny, barely audible, yet in the cavernous silence of the armory, they echoed like hammer blows. She then remounted the scope onto the rifle's Picatinny rail, her fingers tightening the mounting nuts with a practiced torque she seemed to measure in her very bones. She shouldered the weapon in one fluid motion, the stock settling into the pocket of her shoulder as if it were a part of her. She didn't aim down the range. She simply looked through the scope, her body a statue of perfect form. After a moment, she lowered the rifle and placed it gently on the workbench. She took a small, specialized torque wrench from a pocket on her trousers, a tool no one else in the armory possessed. She applied it to the mounting nuts, and it gave a single audible click indicating perfect pressure. Then she took a grease pencil and made a tiny, almost invisible mark on the elevation turret. "It's zeroed," she said. Her voice was quiet, clear, and utterly devoid of triumph. It was her first and only statement, a simple declaration of fact. The finality in her tone left no room for argument. It was not an opinion, it was a diagnosis. It was a pronouncement. The silence that followed her words was different. It was no longer tense, it was awestruck. Chief Thompson, who had turned back from berating the seaman, stared at the rifle, then at her. His face was a canvas of conflicting emotions, disbelief, confusion, and a dawning, terrifying suspicion that he was catastrophically out of his depth. "Zeroed? What are you talking about? You didn't even fire it. You can't zero a scope by looking at a wall. That's impossible." His voice lacked its earlier bluster. It was thin, reedy, the sound of a man whose entire worldview had just been shattered. He was clinging to the wreckage of his expertise, but the tide of her competence was pulling him under. Before Anya could respond, or, more likely, choose not to, a new sound began to permeate the air. It started as a low, rhythmic thumping, a vibration felt more in the chest than heard with the ears. It grew steadily, a deep, powerful whump 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 that rattled the tool racks and made the corrugated metal walls of the armory hum. Every head in the room turned toward the open bay doors. A shadow fell over the concrete apron outside, vast and menacing. The sound became a deafening roar as a Sikorsky H-60 Pave Hawk helicopter, painted a non-reflective matte black, descended from the sky. This was not a Navy aircraft. Its lines were different, bristling with strange antennas and sensor pods that spoke of missions far beyond standard search and rescue. It bore no unit markings, only a stark, minimalist American flag on its tail boom. It didn't land on the designated helipad a quarter-mile away. It was settling directly on the vast, empty parade ground adjacent to the armory, a flagrant violation of every base protocol. The sheer audacity of the act was breathtaking. The downdraft from the rotor blades was a hurricane, kicking up a storm of dust and dried leaves, forcing the sailors to shield their eyes. The base commander, who had remained frozen in the doorway, was now sprinting toward the landing zone, his face a mask of alarm and fury. Unauthorized landings by unmarked special operations aircraft were the stuff of nightmares for a base CO. He was already composing the incident report in his head, a report that would undoubtedly have negative career implications. The Pave Hawk touched down with a gentle puff of its tires, its rotors still spinning at a low, threatening speed. The side door slid open, and a set of portable stairs was kicked out. 3 figures emerged, stepping out of the roaring chaos into the sudden, relative calm on the ground. They moved with an unhurried purpose that commanded attention. Even from a distance, their status was unmistakable. They were generals. One wore the crisp dress blues of the Marine Corps, his chest a solid block of brightly colored ribbons. Another wore the Army's green service uniform, and the third, the dark blue of the Air Force. Each uniform glittered with stars on the shoulders, 4 on the Marine, 4 on the Army general, 3 on the Air Force general. They were a constellation of command, a gathering of power, so immense it felt like a distortion in the fabric of the naval base's reality. They ignored the frantic, saluting base commander who was now jogging to intercept them. Their eyes, as one, were fixed on the open bay door of the armory. They walked in lockstep, their polished shoes crunching on the gravel with a rhythmic, inexorable cadence. They were not coming for the base commander. They were not coming for Chief Thompson. They were coming for someone else, and the entire world seemed to hold its breath, waiting to find out who. The 3 generals strode into the armory, their combined presence sucking the very air out of the room. The space, which had seemed large and imposing moments before, now felt cramped, small, and utterly insignificant. The young sailors flattened themselves against the walls, their all bordering on terror. Chief Thompson stood frozen in the middle of the floor, his mouth slightly agape, looking like a man who had just seen a ghost. The base commander trailed in behind the generals, his face pale and his expression one of complete bewilderment. He had tried to speak to them, to ask their purpose, but had been met with a polite but firm hand gesture from the Marine general that silenced him instantly. The Marine, a man whose face looked like it had been carved from granite and left out in the sun, led the procession. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, swept the room once, dismissing the sailors, the commander, and Chief Thompson as if they were furniture. His gaze landed on Anya Sharma, who was still standing calmly by her workbench. She hadn't moved. She hadn't reacted to the helicopter, to the dust storm, or to the sudden arrival of 11 stars' worth of military authority. She simply stood, her posture relaxed, her hands resting lightly on the rifle she had just serviced. The general's hard expression softened, not into a smile, but into something far more profound, a look of deep, absolute, and unwavering respect. He walked directly to her, his path cleaving through the stunned silence. He stopped precisely 3 feet in front of her, his posture ramrod straight. The Army and Air Force generals fanned out to his sides, forming a perfect, intimidating triumvirate. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, in a single, synchronized motion that was as precise as the workings of a Swiss watch, the Marine general brought his hand up in a salute. It was not the casual, perfunctory salute one gives a passing officer. This was a salute of profound deference. His hand was a blade, his arm rigid, his eyes locked on hers with an intensity that could melt steel. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was a low gravel, a sound that carried the weight of countless command decisions, of battles won and lives lost. It was a voice that had briefed presidents and ordered men to their deaths. And it had just called this quiet, unassuming woman ma'am. The word detonated in the silence of the armory. It was an atomic bomb of vindication. It was a complete and total inversion of the established order. It was the sound of Chief Thompson's world being turned inside out and set on fire. The Army 4-star and the Air Force 3-star snapped to attention and rendered their own salutes with the same gray formality. "Ma'am," the Army general echoed. "Ma'am," said the Air Force general. 3 generals, 2 of them at the highest possible rank in the United States military, were saluting a woman who, moments before, had been dismissed as a lost clerk. They were not saluting her rank. They were saluting her. Her authority, it was now terrifyingly clear, transcended the conventional structures of military hierarchy. Anya returned the salute with a simple, clean nod of her head. It was a gesture of acknowledgement between peers, an acceptance of their respect without a trace of arrogance or surprise. She was not shocked. She had, it seemed, been expecting them. The Marine general held his salute for a long moment before dropping it. He turned his head slightly, his gaze falling upon the now ashen-faced base commander. "Commander," the general said, his tone shifting from respectful to glacially cold. "We are here to collect Operator Sharma. Presidential directive. Operation Nightfall is a go." He used her last name, Sharma, and a title, Operator, that carried an almost mythical weight in the military world. It was a title reserved for the elite of the elite, the members of Tier 1 special mission units like Delta Force and the Naval Special Warfare Development Group, more commonly known as SEAL Team 6. Chief Thompson, who had been struggling to process the salutes, felt a wave of nausea wash over him as he heard that word. Operator. He looked at Sharma, at her slight frame, her calm face, and tried to reconcile it with the legendary figures he'd only heard about in hushed, reverent tones. The base commander, for his part, finally found his voice, though it was strained. General Wallace sighed. "I don't have a petty officer Sharma on my roster with that designation. There must be some mistake." The Marine general, Wallace, gave a humorless smile. "There's no mistake, Commander. Her file is designated SI/TK/G/HCS. You don't have the clearance to view it. Nobody on this base does. Her current assignment here is listed as Administrative Leave, Inventory Specialist. It's a cover. A way for her to decompress between missions." He reached into his jacket and produced a slim folder sealed with red wax. He handed it to the commander. My orders, signed by the Secretary of Defense. The commander took the folder with a trembling hand. He didn't need to open it. The weight of the authority behind it was palpable. He looked from the folder to Sharma, his eyes wide with a new, dawning comprehension. The quiet woman in the armory. The one who fixed the impossible scope. The one who moved with an unnatural grace. It all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. He had had a ghost living on his base for 3 months, a weapon of immense strategic importance, and he hadn't even known it. He felt a profound, chilling sense of his own ignorance. General Wallace then turned his icy gaze upon Chief Thompson, who visibly shrank under the scrutiny. "Chief," Wallace began, his voice dangerously soft, "I am told you are the senior enlisted man in charge of this armory." Thompson could only manage a weak, croaking sound that might have been, "Yes, General. Then perhaps you can explain to me." Wallace continued, his voice dropping even lower, "why you felt it was appropriate to refer to the most decorated operator in the Joint Special Operations Command as little girl." The accusation hung in the air, sharp and heavy as a guillotine's blade. The color drained completely from Thompson's face. He looked as if he might faint. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The full, catastrophic scale of his misjudgment had finally landed on him. He had not just insulted a sailor. He had insulted a living legend, a national asset, in front of 2 4-star generals. His career was not just over. It was annihilated. It was Sharma who broke the terrible silence. "It's fine, General," she said, her voice still calm, still even. The chief was just doing his job, maintaining security in his workspace. She looked at Thompson, not with pity or anger, but with a neutral, assessing gaze. It was a gesture of absolution, so complete, so unexpected. It was somehow more damning than the general's anger. She wasn't sparing him. She was dismissing him. She was confirming that he was so far beneath her notice that his insults had not even registered as an offense. He was an irrelevance. The magnanimity of her gesture was a final, crushing blow to his pride, leaving him utterly broken. The story of what happened in the armory spread through the base, not like wildfire, but like a shockwave. It traveled instantly, carried on waves of disbelief and awe. Within an hour, every sailor, from the lowest seaman recruit to the highest-ranking captain, knew. They knew about the black helicopter that landed on the parade ground. They knew about the 3 generals who walked into the armory. And they knew that those 3 generals had saluted a quiet, unassuming woman and called her ma'am. The narrative became a legend in real time, details shifting and embellishing with each retelling. In one version, she had reassembled the rifle blindfolded. In another, she had headbutt Chief Thompson. The most popular version, however, was the one closest to the truth, because the truth was more incredible than any fiction they could invent. The name Sharma was spoken in hushed tones in the mess halls and barracks. Her file was sealed, her past a mystery, which only fueled the speculation. She was Devgru, they said. She had been on the Bin Laden raid. She had more confirmed kills than Carlos Hathcock. She was a ghost, a myth, a warrior monk who had walked among them unnoticed. The armory itself became a kind of shrine. The workbench where she had stood was left untouched. The Mark 12 rifle she had zeroed was carefully placed in a display case, the tiny grease pencil mark on its turret a sacred relic. Sailors would make pilgrimages to the armory, just to look at it, to stand in the spot where it all happened. The spot on the concrete floor where the generals had stood to salute her became hallowed ground. Someone, in an act of anonymous reverence, spray-painted a faint white outline around the 3 spots, forever marking the place where the base's hierarchy had been turned on its head. It became known simply as the ma'am spot. Chief Thompson was not formally disciplined. General Wallace, at Sharma's request, let the matter drop. But his punishment was far more severe than any captain's mast. His authority was gone, evaporated in an instant. The sailors under his command no longer feared him. They pitied him. They looked at him with a mixture of contempt and second-hand embarrassment. His booming voice, once a tool of intimidation, now sounded hollow and pathetic. He became quiet, withdrawn, a ghost haunting his own armory. A few weeks after the incident, a young female seaman, barely 18 years old, came to the armory to check out a sidearm for watch duty. She was nervous, intimidated by the space and by the story she had heard about the chief. She approached the counter hesitantly. Thompson looked up, his eyes weary. He saw the fear in her face, and for the first time, he recognized it as the same fear he had so enjoyed inspiring in others. A flicker of something, shame, perhaps, or a sliver of enlightenment, passed through him. He didn't shout. He didn't condescend. He got the sidearm, checked her credentials, and slid it across the counter to her. "Be safe out there, sailor," he said, his voice quiet, almost gentle. The young woman stared at him, surprised. She mumbled a "thank you, Chief," and hurried away. It was a small moment, unnoticed by anyone else, but it was a profound transformation. The loud, arrogant gatekeeper was gone, replaced by a humbled man who had learned the hardest lesson of his life: that you can judge the quality of a person by the size of their heart or the content of their character, but you should never, ever judge the lethality of a warrior by their gender or their size. His education had been brutal, public, and absolute. The legend of Anya Sharma endured long after she had boarded the black helicopter and vanished back into the classified world from which she came. Her story became institutional folklore, a cautionary tale passed down from one generation of sailors to the next. It was told to new arrivals during their indoctrination briefings, a stark and powerful lesson about the dangers of assumption and the true meaning of professionalism. The stories serve as a constant reminder that the most formidable people are often the ones who feel no need to advertise their strength. They don't wear their accomplishments like a billboard. They carry them in their silence, in their calm, in the steady, practiced competence of their hands. Anya Sharma had left behind more than just a zeroed rifle and a humble chief. She had fundamentally altered the culture of the base. An undercurrent of mutual respect began to flow more freely between the ranks. Sailors started looking at each other differently, with a little less judgment and a little more curiosity. They understood now that the quiet woman in supply or the unassuming man swabbing the decks could be someone extraordinary, a hero hiding in plain sight. The focus shifted from the superficial markers of authority, a loud voice, a stern expression, to the tangible evidence of skill and character. Competence became the new currency of respect. The lesson was simple but profound. Your resume is what you say you are. Your legacy is what you do. Anya's actions in the armory that day were a masterclass in this philosophy. She hadn't argued with Thompson. She hadn't reported him. She had simply performed her task to a standard of excellence so high, so undeniable, that it rendered his prejudice completely irrelevant. She had defeated his ignorance not by fighting it, but by making it obsolete. Her triumph was not in the public validation from the generals, as satisfying as that was. Her true triumph was in her unwavering commitment to her own professional standard, regardless of the audience. She would have been just as precise, just as focused, if the armory had been empty. The general's arrival didn't make her a legend. It simply revealed to the world what she already was. That was her power. It was internal, self-contained, and absolute. It was the quiet confidence of someone who has been tested in the crucible of real-world conflict and has emerged not just victorious, but serene. She needed no one's approval because she had already earned her own. And in doing so, she taught an entire naval base that the loudest person in the room is often the weakest, and that true strength lies in the silence between the heartbeats and the calm before the storm. Her legacy was not a story of revenge, but one of enlightenment. Months later, a single, heavily redacted line item appeared in the official after-action report for Operation Nightfall, a document so highly classified that only a handful of people in the world would ever read it. It was buried deep within pages of technical data and strategic analysis. It read simply, "Objective secured. High-value asset recovered. Mission success attributed to tactical brilliance of OIC." OIC? Sharma? That was all. No mention of the three generals, the helicopter, or the armory. No description of the impossible odds or the incredible feats of skill and bravery that had undoubtedly occurred. Just a quiet, professional statement of fact. It was a fitting postscript, a testament to a woman who existed in the shadows, whose victories were measured not in medals and parades, but in the silent continuation of freedom for people who would never know her name. Her work was done, and she had moved on to the next task, the next mission, with the same quiet competence that defined her. Back at Coronado, the base had found its new equilibrium. Chief Thompson eventually put in for retirement, leaving the Navy a quieter and more thoughtful man than he had been before. The new chief in charge of the armory, a young but wise gunner's mate, made it a point to tell every new sailor who worked for him the story of Anya Sharma. He would point to the rifle in the display case. "Look at that," he would say. "That rifle was serviced by a ghost, a woman who was more of a weapon than the tool in her hands." She taught this whole base a lesson. Don't ever assume you know who you're talking to. Don't ever mistake quiet for weak. And always treat everyone with respect. Because you never know when you might be standing in the presence of greatness. The story became a living part of the base's identity, a moral compass that guided its sailors. It was a legacy of humility, a legacy of professionalism, a legacy born from one woman's refusal to be defined by the ignorant assumptions of others. True legacy isn't what you leave behind in monuments of stone or bronze. It's the standard that continues forward in the actions of others. It's the lesson that is learned, the behavior that is changed, the quiet competence that is emulated by those who come after. Anya Sharma's legacy was not in her mythical status, but in the thousands of small moments of respect and professionalism that now occurred daily on a base she had briefly, and almost silently, called home. It was the echo of her silence, and it was more powerful than any sound. The world is full of noise. It is filled with people who shout their accomplishments from the rooftops, who demand respect without earning it, who believe that the volume of their voice is a measure of their worth. They build their identities on a foundation of arrogance and superficiality, mistaking confidence for competence. But beyond this noise, in the quiet corners of the world, in the shadows of high-stakes professions, there are others. They are the quiet professionals. They are the men and women who have mastered their craft to such a degree that they have no need for ego. Their validation comes not from the applause of the crowd, but from the flawless execution of their duty. They are the surgeons whose steady hands perform miracles, the pilots who land crippled aircraft on a prayer, the warriors who walk into the darkest places on earth to protect the innocent. They do not speak of their deeds because their actions speak for them in a language of pure, undeniable skill that transcends words. Anya Sharma was one of these people. Her story is a testament to the enduring power of quiet competence. It is a reminder that a person's value is not determined by their gender, their size, or the rank on their collar. It is determined by their character, their discipline, and their actions under pressure. She faced down prejudice not with anger, but with excellence. She answered arrogance not with insults, but with precision. She taught a powerful lesson without ever intending to be a teacher. Her silence was her shield, and her skill was her sword. The incident at the armory was more than just a moment of personal vindication. It was a parable for our times. It reminds us to look past the surface, to question our own assumptions, and to seek out the quiet competence that so often goes unnoticed in a world that celebrates the loud and the boisterous. It is a call to be more like Sharma, to focus on our craft, to let our work speak for itself, and to carry our strength with humility and grace. The legacy of that day is a challenge to us all, to earn our respect through our actions, to build our worth on a foundation of skill, and to understand that the most profound impact is often made by those who make the least noise. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, and where silent professionalism defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.